Welcome to the Dr. Dad's podcast, where a naturopath and chiropractor come together each week to share lifestyle medicine, health advice, and inspiring interviews with some of the top experts in health and wellness, bringing you the latest in nutrition, exercise, ancient healing, toxins and detox, your microbiome, mindset, hormones, brain, and much more. Stay tuned. We're going to teach you how to experience growth daily. Hey everybody, Dr. Dad's coming at you on this beautiful sunny day. Dr. Nick, how are you, brother?
The day in paradise, buddy. I'm loving life, and I'm really excited to talk. This is our second week talking about a parenting topic, and we've needed those in the times we're in. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, such a need, especially right now, right? And so one of the fun topics you and me like to get into, mental health. Today we're actually going to focus more on children's mental health. And just talking about mental health issues for a second, this can be kind of scary for an adult to talk about. I'm sure even more so for a child. And, recent studies are showing that this is something we definitely need to be talking about. So in the United States alone, 1 in 5 children a year suffer from a mental health disorder, according to the CDC. That comes to over 17 million children meeting criteria for disorders that affect a child's behavior, ability to learn, and process emotions. So today's guest that we have on with us says mental health issues don't go away by ignoring them. Acknowledging them and talking about them openly is the first step to managing them. What better way to reach a child than with a story? So today's guest, we have author Brian Wray. And a little bit about the author. Brian was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and moved to New York after graduating from Penn State. In 2003, Brian was awarded the Nicholl Fellowship in Screenwriting. During an opportunity to write for Walt Disney Studios, Brian discovered his passion for telling stories for children. He writes from Brooklyn, where he lives with his wife, 2 daughters, and their endless inspiration. Brian's first book, Unraveling Rose, was the 2017 Forward Indies Gold winner for Picture Book's Early Reader. And then today, I believe we're talking about Max's Box, which, hey, buddy, thanks for coming on. You're going to tell us more about it. But Brian, I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, for taking the time to talk to me.
So, Brian, this is such an important topic. Tell me a little bit of how you got into this stuff, man.
Great question. Like you said in the intro, I got the opportunity to write for Disney, which was wonderful. And screenwriting work started to evaporate for me, but I still had this real passion for telling stories for children. And, so I started focusing on writing picture books. And I definitely had some misfires, some stories that weren't so successful. And it suddenly dawned on me to sort of maybe try and focus on writing about things that I knew more about. My first book, you mentioned Unraveling Rose, deals with a stuffed rabbit who has a worry thought that won't leave her alone. And it's about her learning to deal with that worry thought. And that's something that I definitely know what it feels like. And my second book, Max's Box, is about a little boy who basically suppresses his emotions. And so, again, I felt like these were topics that I knew something about and that I could tackle.
You know, me and Dr. Nick were always talking with our guests and these experts about how do we I don't want to mess up my kid. What do I do? What do I do? Right. And It's funny because we also have discussions about how needed it is to teach our children how to deal with their emotions and their mental health from a very early age. So I think this is brilliant, man. I mean, to be able to put this into children's books so that they can actually learn, and especially these illustrations and things that I'm seeing. I mean, amazing, incredible idea. And I'd like to just dial in, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about each book and then the importance of these lessons for these kids long term.
Great. Max's Box, again, I have 2 daughters, and I think one of the toughest things for me as a parent, frankly, was learning how to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to help them manage their emotions in a healthy way. I didn't have those tools. They weren't necessarily given to me growing up, so I had to learn them in order to teach them. And so I just felt like it was something that maybe other parents could identify with, and also children could identify with, that they needed to hear that it was okay to express themselves. first and foremost, I'm a storyteller. That's what I always approach, like, how can I tell an interesting story? These aren't how-to books that I'm writing. I'm really trying to get, kids drawn in, if I can, by sort of the magic of the story. And then hopefully that inspires conversations between them and their parents.
Well, and we always talk, everyone says, you got to read to your children before bed every night, right? And a lot of times we're reading stuff that is great. I'm sure it's entertaining. It's great and creative for the imagination, but we don't always get these lessons out of these type stories when we read to our children. So such a great place, to teach those things. I have a little boy, he's 6. And one of the things that we've spent some time doing since he was about 4, when we've been reading to him before bed, is we have these like Buddhist nighttime stories, but every single story has a lesson to be learned at the end of the story. So we've always kind of focused as parents more on that kind of wavelength. Nick, I don't know about you, man. What do you do with your little guys?
Yeah, we have a ritual of reading every night too, and sometimes it's Marvel, sometimes it's Dr. Wayne Dyer has a couple books on helping you feel your emotions and those kind of things. We mix it up. I mean, I find that the dialogue though after the story is it's kind of like you're encouraging them into that creative aspect, and then having dialogue after is where the magic happens. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and so I'm kind of feeling into it sounds like that's how these stories go for you. Is it because step one is creating the right environment for them to be able to express themselves? So can you dive into that piece a little bit more?
Absolutely. I think younger children in particular, especially, need to feel that connection to their parents to help regulate their emotions, right? And we were talking about just maybe now more than ever, making that time every day for adults to relax and for children to relax is crucial. And you can do that in a number of ways. It can just be cuddling. It could be singing songs together. But certainly, like you both mentioned, reading stories at night is a great way to do that. I mean, reading aloud has so many positive benefits, right? Like, increases the language. Which also means you can teach them how to talk about emotions, and allowing them to see themselves or something they might be going through in a story gets to exactly what you're talking about. It starts a conversation, and it just happens naturally, right? It's not forced. It just happens because you're there, you're relaxed, and you're just spending time together. So that's one way. First, to create that environment where a child feels safe expressing themselves or talking about feelings, creating that environment. There's lots of things you can do, but making that time every day to relax and to do it is definitely one key way to do it.
Yeah, I'm curious how you brought your writings and your experience with story into your own parenting strategy. Like, how did that impact you in raising your girls?
I think my interest in learning how to be sort of a more helpful parent came first. Learning how to do some things that maybe I didn't already know how to do, but then could impart on them was a big factor. And then sort of little things I would see in our day-to-day life sort of maybe suggested that, again, maybe other parents might benefit from it, other kids might benefit from it. And that's been one thing that's been really rewarding as I go out and I read Max's Box to schools, is to see just how interested the kids are in this subject, and talking about feelings. They're ready. The kids are ready to talk about it, right? They know what's going on. And once they know that it's sort of safe and that this book sort of can lead them in that direction, hands are going up, and they're really into it. Sorry to digress, but first, I guess it was about, it was things that I felt like I needed to learn to be a better parent.
Well, Nick, Dr. Nick, you talk about this a lot, right? We talk about this whole not suppressing your emotions and moving through trauma and dealing with these things. And, our kids, they're so animated and expressive at this young age. And I feel like some parents, and we may be guilty of this from time to time, is like they're feeling certain emotions and you hear parents say like, well, stop crying. And, quit being ridiculous. And these kids don't understand why, I'm sure as an adult we're saying things like, don't feel what you're feeling. It's like, or it's not okay to feel. Like they don't get that validation from us as parents.
Right.
And I love the way you kind of bring this forward, man, with Max's box, of how this box just continues to grow the more he keeps kind of suppressing how he feels about things, instead of, being able to communicate with his parents about how he feels, whether that's anger, sadness, or worry, or fear, or whatever it may be. Such an important thing for kids to be able to have that line of communication where they can share their feelings. And what a different role that some parents need to understand when we look at this, of that maybe we need to dive head into these things and maybe spend that time, like you're saying, at story time, and say, have you ever felt anger? What makes you, when have you felt like that? Or when have you been sad? And I just don't think those conversations are being had.
Yeah. Well, for just to give a quick synopsis of the book so people can, when we reference the book, it's basically about this little boy named Max who's given a magic box that will grow to hold whatever he puts inside of it. But he quickly discovers that it will also hold emotions that he's not sure what to do with. And so the box keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger the more he puts in. And it grows so big that it gets to the point where he can't really do any of the things that he used to enjoy doing with his friends, like climbing trees or swimming or riding a bike even, because he's carrying around this huge box with him. And it's only when another person identifies that he's feeling sad and talks to him about how he's feeling that the box begins to transform in a sort of magical way. And I won't give away the ending, but he's able to let it go because basically somebody talked to him about how he was feeling. And I think, to your point about having these conversations, I think that people come a long way in understanding the importance of mental health and emotional health issues. But there might be some lingering misconceptions that, fear and anger and all these emotions are the domain of adulthood. And they're not. Children experience the exact same feelings. What they might not have is the language to articulate those feelings, right? They don't have, an emotional vocabulary, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So one thing you can do to really help a child with having these conversations is helping them identify the feeling they're having in the moment, not focusing on the behavior, but identifying the emotion. You seem angry that your brother or sister took your toy, right? And then you give them this emotional vocabulary, and then over time, because you're helping them identify their feelings in the moment, then they can start to identify their feelings in the moment and articulate them to you rather than having an emotional outburst.
Well, I think it's helpful for a parent too, because my boys are 5 and 8, and my older one's really starting to experience and express his anger in a different kind of way, and it's great. And I'm just thinking for parents that sometimes we need to realize that part of parenting is that we can't just stuff up the feeling, talk about the behavior, but really just talking about the emotion that's there. And I recognize in our own boy that when we take the time, just let him have his experience, talk about how that situation went, and it's such a different kind of dialogue as opposed to and my younger son's a good example. Sometimes we're trying to get ourselves together to get somewhere. And then in my parenting mind, when he's acting like a little, shit before we leave the house, kind of like, too bad, buddy, this is kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
And it's funny how our schedule as a parent to try to get from point A to point B or whatever the story is, meet friends or what have you. And
Sure.
We let that get in the way of a parenting moment. And it's just so important to just remember that, these little creatures, they need our guidance, they need our attention. And sometimes we do have to, be late for something because we just need to take the time to help our little ones mold their behaviors. So yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, maybe some strategies or some tools
Sure.
Around, the inconvenient times that our kids get emotional and how do we put ourselves aside?
You brought up a great point. It's difficult as a parent because, we have our own set of stresses and things that are pressing on us as well, right?
Yeah.
but like you said, it's what's important is if you can to try and focus on the emotion that's driving the behavior. Tantrums or outbursts are more often than not driven by a child feeling overwhelmed by an emotion, fear, anger, frustration, whatever it be, right? And the natural inclination as a parent is to try and step in and, redirect the behavior or talk to them, in the moment, or, that's really not something we should be doing. And, but what you end up doing, the goal is for a tantrum not to become the default response to feeling overwhelmed by emotion, right? But sometimes when the parent steps in and starts trying to sort of intervene in the moment, the sort of unintended consequence is that you positively reinforce the behavior, right? Because now they're getting a certain kind of attention, right? So as long as the child, if you're at home and this outburst is not causing the child any danger or putting anyone else in danger, really sometimes the best thing to do is simply not give it any attention, right? Let the child calm down, which they will eventually, right? And then have the conversation. You seemed really angry about this, or really, frustrated that this, and again, you're focusing on the emotion, not the behavior. You're helping build their emotional vocabulary, and that helps them refocus, right? But that's tricky, right? It's, I've been in the grocery store with a child who is having an outburst because something's not going the way they want it to. And yeah, you're sitting there with your grocery cart full of groceries, and people are looking at you like, what's going on? And it's hard to remember to take a deep breath, pick up the child, walk outside, go for a 30-second walk, try to calm down, and then talk about the situation, right? If you can, right? I mean, that's the goal. But it's difficult. But if you can focus on the emotion rather than the behavior, then that's really going to help them as well identify those emotions and start to regulate them.
Well, I love that you said that, because I feel like as a parent, because I've felt it on occasion, I've recognized where I'm not being present, and it comes into that shame-based parenting, like what are other parents going to think of me, or other people,
Right.
And
Right.
it's so unfortunate that we've been conditioned to be really concerned about what other people think, and it's ultimately it's to the detriment of the child. So if you could kind of talk about that too, just help us all understand, what's driving our behavior, which then, determines how our kids respond, because it's super important for us to sort of take some of the pressure off of us. So
Sure.
and yeah.
I think a few things come to mind. One, like I personally was not given these tools, so I had to learn them. So I'm in the situation of learning and trying to teach at the same time, which has its own, so I'm sort of behind the curve a little bit, right? So some people that adds more stress to the situation, right? Which raises, everyone's, can raise everyone's stress. Two, there are some existing stigmas about emotions and emotional outbursts, right? And it's hard to ignore those. Like you're talking about, what are the other parents thinking? That I can't control my kid in the grocery store, and it's hard to let that go because there's a lot of momentum behind those stigmas, right? But as much as we can do to just not, again, like to your point, be in the moment, focus on what's really happening and address that will help. Those are two things that came to mind.
Yeah.
When I'm listening to you all think, and I'm thinking, it's so simple, right? As adults, when we get in our moods, whether we're just pissed off, right, or we're maybe sad one day, like we usually just have to feel the way we feel and move through it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
It's not like we have someone else looking down on us like we did when we were kids saying, well, why are you feeling that way? And what's the matter with you? What's going on, right? And I think we forget as parents sometimes that our kids are going to have these bad days, right? They're going to have a day maybe where they're down, they don't feel great, maybe they're tired, they're going to have a day, maybe like you're saying, they're upset, maybe a friend at school pissed them off at class or at recess, and they're coming home with that. And yet we jump to this whole story trying to fill in the gaps versus just understanding like, okay, my kid's feeling this, Let's
Right.
just keep an eye on him. Let's watch him. Let him deal with it, and then I'll talk to him later about it and say, "Hey, I noticed you were angry today when you got home. What's going on with you?" You know,
Mm.
and like you're saying, try to help establish this line of communication as your child grows up, so that you can have these tools to discuss and keep that that clarity and that message between parent and child.
Absolutely, I think you're absolutely right. And um, we also as adults have perspective when we're feeling like that, right? We can better identify why we're feeling this way. We know the feeling's going to pass. We know that we might be able to do something about that feeling. Children don't have that kind of perspective. And something else I talk about is something called what I call teaching alternatives, right? Which is sort of a way of gaining some perspective on a feeling. And what I mean by that is, let's just say, for instance, it's a way of basically involving your child in imagining or helping come up with solutions to what's going on and causing the way they're feeling, or helping manage the way they're feeling, right? So, if your child's, let's say, playing with blocks and it keeps falling over, something you could say is, you seem really frustrated that your blocks keep falling over. What could you do about that? You could ask for help, or you could try building it again. What do you think? Right? And then you've engaged them in the process. You've identified the feeling, right? And now you've engaged them with coming up with a solution, which is really about perspective, right? And then, so if you can keep those, it's another tool maybe you can do. And that's going to help them get to the place where you're talking about. Like, the older they get, they've got this new perspective now, and they know that they have some role in regulating how they're feeling, or how those feelings might play out.
Such a good point. I'll go ahead, Nick.
I was just saying, it's just so important to help them develop that resiliency mindset, at a young age, because how many of us, that grow up without the right kind of training or perspective tools, and we feel shame for having emotion because we were shamed
Right.
for having emotions. And it's a really unfortunate scenario that when we don't get this toolkit at a young age to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling, to bring attention to it, bring awareness to it, have these perspectives, and then we get to choose a new way of moving forward, instead of thinking like, man, my parents are really pissed at me, I'm a bad person, I did it wrong again. And you don't actually learn from that experience. And I think that we can all take ownership as parents to go like, there's still something that obviously I haven't healed from my childhood about, how I handle emotions. And so it's a wonderful dialogue, because it's for kids, but it's also for us as parents. So if you could kind of speak to that, like, I love how you brought in that vulnerability of just like, hey, I needed to learn these tools, and so I wanted to help teach them and get this message out. So if you could kind of speak to this isn't just for their kids, like it's actually for parents too, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things, again, the real goal is hopefully to have a story that children engage in and get something from. I want them to be entertained by it and inspired by it, hopefully. But, given that it does sort of under the surface touch on some pretty solid issues that adults might need, to learn about as well. There's a section at the back of Max's box called A Word About Emotions, which touches on some of the things we're talking about right now. Just a perspective for adults and things they can do to help their kids. Because I think there are a lot of people that don't necessarily have these tools for a whole host of reasons, but that might, appreciate, some basic guidance of ways that we might sort of redirect our feelings in the middle of a situation, or the way we're responding to somebody else's feelings.
What do you think the impact would be if this kind of dialogue became part of, say, school systems? It became part of like a parenting, sort of survival kit. What do you think the future would look like for humanity if we all were allowed to bring these teachings in? Like, what kind of future do you see for the planet if that were the case?
Really hopeful, because empathy would play a big role. It's hard to be empathetic to somebody going through something if you can't understand it, or feel it yourself, right? So if we're better in touch with ourselves and how we're feeling, we can better empathize with someone else going through something. So that's why I say it makes me hopeful, because I think that the biggest thing to come from this being part of everyone's dialogue is empathy.
Love that. I love that you said that, because we are in the middle of a pandemic where there's a lot of, exogenous or outside stress going on that's impacting families. Suicide rates are up. There's, abuse is up, domestic violence. I mean, there's a lot of trauma stuck in the psyche of our global brothers and sisters. Yeah. And, I love that this message is getting out now too, because, I mean, now's the time. I mean, most of us are coming out of some version of a lockdown, but these are critical tools to share with humanity. So, if you can kind of speak to the timing and kind of maybe dive a little bit deeper into what we just shared, which I thought was brilliant, just helping people become more human, more humanity with empathy.
Yeah, I think that, to your point, children right now, because that's where my focus is, but children right now might not fully understand what's going on. But they are definitely feeling it too. They have been just as impacted as everyone else. They've been separated from their friends, from their school, from their day-to-day activities. And we know that those kinds of big changes can cause an increase in sadness and anxiety. And children, a lot of adults don't know what to do with that increase in sadness and anxiety, and a lot of children certainly don't know what to do with that increase in emotions. And the last thing you want them to do is to suppress it, because that has some really not healthy outcomes. It results in acting out in anger. Over time can lead to an increase in feeling isolated, or an increase in the anxiety, or, down the road, outright depression. So, part of the benefit of being empathetic, being able to identify how we're all feeling and helping each other through it, is going to hopefully alleviate a lot of those possible symptoms from suppressing these feelings.
Yeah, beautiful. Go ahead, David.
Well, I'm looking at your books, man. Like Nick was saying earlier, it's a children's book, but this is also a tool to teach parents. I mean,
I hope so.
I literally see you writing a series of these, man. Like I'm seeing 2 stories, but like Nick is saying, like I see a collection of this being able to be given to parents, so that parents can go through a process with their children. They're both learning. The child is learning one thing on their end, and then the parent is creating understanding on the other side of it. And it's so needed in this world, like Nick is saying. Like, this is like a missing piece. It's like that missing link. We all talk about this subject, which nobody wants to talk about, right? But everyone is aware that we have this issue with mental health in our country. Yet nothing is being done when these kids are coming out of the gates, during early child development, to make the change.
Sure.
And buddy, this is awesome. I mean, I see 2, but I see 10 more coming. And I can just totally see it in this big, thick book right now of this onslaught of stories that's just needed to be in every home. Because like you just said earlier, you didn't have these tools, you had to learn. And I think me and Nick are in the same boat. We're trying to find answers because we want to be better parents. Sure. And, some of us were blessed that our parents did the best job they could, and we learned some things from them that have helped us when we became parents. But for the most part, there isn't a how-to, right? I mean, it's kind of as we go.
No, well, I mean, again, like my parents were great, lovely people, but it's just these stigmas and these ideas about mental health and emotional health, they're lingering still, and certainly, again, I'm 49. So when I was a kid, they were definitely there. When I was writing Max's Box, one of the things that made me really feel like, okay, maybe this is the right book for this time, is I was at the playground with my youngest daughter, and little boy fell, and the adult he was with, he hurt himself, he's crying, and the grown-up that he was with said, "Come on now, big boys don't cry." And I thought, I don't doubt that the grown-up's intentions were good. It's sort of shorthand for saying you're going to be okay, or this isn't a big deal. I get it, but he glossed right over what was going on sort of right in front of him. He was feeling some pain and he was letting that out. And that's okay.
I tell you what though, I mean, that's a knee-jerk reaction. It was almost, it's like it's ingrained. Like he probably just recall, I heard my dad say this to me, bang, it's there. It's programmed in. Like that's
I mean, again, I say it with no judgment. I know it's a shorthand for like, come on now, let's keep going, or you're going to be fine. And it's meant with the best of intentions, but it does sort of non-verbally say, I'm not sure what to do with your feelings.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do with them. And then and now you've said verbally and non-verbally to the child, what are you doing, basically? And so next time, how are they going to feel about having a feeling?
Totally. Well, it's like, it's absolute zero validation for having an emotion. Yeah. And so, like you said, that box gets bigger and bigger, and to the point where it explodes. We grow up, and we see someone who has a different point of view than us, and we jump all over them. And how dare you think differently than me? You're not allowed to think differently than me. I mean, it's it's such a crazy phenomenon that we, if we all were a little more gentle with ourselves and look back and go, well, wow, so much of who I am is habits. Things were just imprinted in me because words have such penetration in our psyche and our neurology, and we spew stuff out without even thinking about it. And it's sad that we're I'm happy that there's a movement, but it's also sad that this is kind of how we were raised. I mean, I grew up with that. Like, you better not cry, man. Like, don't just shrug it off. Boys don't cry. I mean, it's an important message.
Walk it off.
Totally.
Walk it off. Yeah. Well, one of the things I put in the back for the word about emotions is, I don't know. I said, this still needs to be said. It's okay to cry. Mm-hmm. Tears come with pain. Tears come with anger, fear, frustration. Tears come with happiness sometimes, right? Again, focus on the emotion, not the tears. To your point, basically what you're saying is old habits die hard, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why it's important to lay a different kind of groundwork early with our kids, right? Because if you build different habits into their life, those will also be hard to break, which in this case would be a good thing.
Yeah, I got a question for you that's sort of a little segue into something else, but so there's a huge amount of gaming going on for kids in these days. Like, what kind of impact do you think, or if you feel comfortable speaking to, like screen time and kids growing up in this time? Like, this is a really interesting time for a child to grow up. Do you have any sort of opinions or thoughts on screens and it being used as a parenting tool?
I know what my personal feelings are about it, which is, I think it's the Mr. Softy. Can you hear me? Sorry.
No, you're fine, man.
I'll start again.
I
have my own feelings about it. I think it should be limited, is my feeling. I've read some things that suggest, obviously, that too much screen time is now starting to show itself as not being healthy for children. But I sort of had that instinct before, mostly because it felt like a disconnect. And especially in young children, getting back to what I said earlier, I think they need to feel a connection to their parents in order to regulate emotions and other things as well, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So, like, it's just more time that you're not connecting, I guess, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because, I mean, a lot of what Dave and I talk about too, in order for proper communication to happen, the connection has to be there first. And if there's a barrier between you, like if that barrier is, a screen or something else, I mean, it's really hard to create space for that communication to happen. Go ahead, David. I know you want to say something.
Well, I mean, that was my next talking point, man, is it's scary for parents. This is intimidating. I think parents that maybe don't have a grip on their child's behavior, or maybe see that their child's depressed or anxious, they can get kind of lost in it, right? Not really be understanding of where is this coming from. But like we're talking about right now, it's one thing I would tell the parents that are listening right now is the first question to ask, like Nick just said, is, well, how clear is that communication between you and your child?
Right.
How clear is that connection? Because if that's already not there, then there's probably your first issue that you're having with your child is there's no connection between parent and child.
Right.
And I'm not a therapist, but I mean, this is pragmatic, right? It's just kind of just thinking at the big picture here. And the other thing I would say to that, to some of these parents is, we all grew up, like we said earlier, and we learned a lot of these things from our parents. Like one of the ones my dad would say is pain doesn't hurt. And I just kind of look at him like, really? What? Right? Like, what are you talking about? But I think we need to have a little bit of a gut check as parents because we want to be better parents than our parents. Every parent wants that for their kids. But how much have we questioned what our parents taught us and how we're going about it when we're kind of doing the same stuff versus, okay, maybe I need to try something new to pass forward to my kid because I didn't have that growing up. And that's such a good place for your books, man, because these are perfect tools to do that.
Education is key, right? Like being open to learning new things is gonna bring you a lot of benefits that you probably can't even totally foresee. So there are many tools out there. There's great organizations like the Child Mind Institute, which I think their website is childmind.org. So if you're a parent that's having questions about your child's behavior or what might be going on, they're a great resource for information. So the good news is there really is a lot of information out there for people that have questions. There's places you can go to get the answers. And then depending on the level at which, your child may or may not need help, they might be able to direct you. There's places to go where you can be directed to getting the help you need or your child needs.
Awesome. So what's the next book, Brian? You've gotten 2 good books about some pretty good emotional topics. What's the next one you got cooking up?
I'm really excited about the next one. It is called Maya and the Very Tall Wall. And it is about a little girl named Maya who has lots of big questions, but she has this magical wall in her backyard. And as she starts to get a little older, she notices that the wall in her backyard gets taller and taller. And as the wall gets taller and taller, she becomes shyer and shyer about asking her questions out loud. And what she wants to know is, what's on the other side of that wall? And she tries all kinds of ways to get to the top and get over it, but nothing works. And finally, she realizes she has to speak up and use her voice. And when she does, things really change. And I'll leave it at that.
Beautiful.
I can't help but, as you're talking about Max's Box, this Maya's Wall, I keep thinking these are amazing Disney shorts. Have you thought about going back to Disney and saying, hey, we've got some animated, learning opportunities here? I
haven't worked with Disney now for maybe, was it 15 years, I guess. So I'm a little out of touch there, but boy, I would be honored. Yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
Because kids are going to watch. We actually watched a few shorts we have the Disney Channel. We watched a few shorts, and they're great because even there's opportunities for discussion in film as well. And I'm just getting the mental image of seeing your characters light up on a screen. So we want to give everyone who's listening an opportunity to find your books, and so how can people access your information?
I'm on all the social medias. You can probably just search for my name, Brian, Brian Wray, or my website, which is www.authorbrianwray.com.
Perfect. And then you said you're on Facebook as well, and
Instagram, Twitter. Yeah.
And Brian, they can get your books on Amazon. What's the easiest way for them to get their hands on the books?
Amazon probably best, or directly from the publisher. I think Barnes and Noble carries them online. Maybe Target as well. Several of the big retail online places. But yeah, certainly Amazon.
Awesome. And so everyone listening, again, the 2 books that he's got going right now are Max's Box and Unraveling Rose. And I think I'm going to go pick up both, actually. So I'll get that done pretty quick. But you got to check these out. Super amazing stuff, man. And I'm really excited to see, like I said earlier, the next dozen come because I totally see you going places with this. This is amazing, man.
Thank you so much. And thank you for like hitting such an important topic. It's so encouraging to know that other people out there talking about this and getting the word out. I think it's going to lead to a lot of great things.
That's our hope too. So on that note, we always get our guests or ask our guests to share a home play exercise, something that families can, or parents can do with their kids possibly in this situation. What's something that you can get people to get started on as an exercise?
Oh my, I think I would just be sort of redundantly going back to one of the things I mentioned earlier in terms of a real game, like an actual game, or something that you can do as an activity.
Yeah, whatever you feel like would have impact for the people listening, for them to do in order to experience what you're sharing.
I think dedicated story time every night or whenever works best for your family. Pick 3 books. Let your child pick a book. Involve them in the process. Whatever it is, let them pick something that they want to read, share it, and you get a great dialogue going that way.
Yeah, what I'm gonna do with what you shared is bring more dialogue at the end of the story time. We do just a short little snippet, but I recognize now after talking to you, like I don't do that enough, and so I'm gonna be much more intentional with creating an opportunity to dive into some of the narrative, even if it's like Marvel characters. I mean, there'll be some fun conversations that will come out of that.
Absolutely. Again, when I do go to schools or bookstores or libraries, kids are so responsive to the story. I'll just ask, does anybody here know what it's like to have a big feeling and you don't know what to do with? Every hand goes up. They want to talk about it. I get angry with my sister sometimes, and they're just all so ready to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the teachers and the librarians are like, we have to go now because the kids would talk about it forever. So yeah, I mean, make those conversations as long as you want after the reading because they're ready. They love to talk.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for being on the call today. We look forward to your books. Both Dave and I are going to get onto Amazon after this call and order them for our family. So thank you for your time and your expertise. And once Maya's Wall comes out, let's have you back and we can dive into this conversation again.
I would love that. And thank you both so much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Dr. Dads and share with your family and friends. You can also follow and interact with Dr. Nick and Dr. David on Facebook and Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration and the latest in health and wellness. Be well.